Right, super quick, but I'm going to make an audio. I'm going for a walk, and I'm going to make an audio which I'm going to turn into a something that can be put up onto YouTube. All I know in life is if you're writing or creating, as you're doing jobs, I've just spent half an hour tidying up, relocating places in my little jalopy in the right place. That's when you have your good thoughts. In other words, in fact, the most interesting piece of science I've read for many years, proper science, but I've just got to deal with reading, is if you're writing an essay, or maybe you're just making videos, or whatever you're doing that will benefit from, the key word is not intelligence. Intelligence is something, or IQ especially, read the books from the 60s and 70s of a man called Sinek. Now, I don't expect many people to read, but essentially he completely smashed through this construct of the IQ test. And I'm not referring to people of different ethnicities, etc., etc. This thing called official intelligence, how you do in exams or IQ tests, depends on the culture you're brought up in, the class, etc., etc., etc. There are plenty of people in this world, in fact the majority, who wouldn't score terribly well on IQ tests or even do well in school exams, who in their own way, and that's not patronizing, it's the exact opposite, they have phenomenal intelligences. I happen to deal with people for some time off and on who were stuck in the bottom third, not as some Joan of Arc, just I was assisting them for even a sort of, so I would learn about society properly though, and almost always unpaid. And you realise that the guy or the woman who's stuck there with long-term issues that can be described as partially mental health, they may have a phenomenal intelligence, smartness, or however we want to call it, to necessarily game the system with social skills, even if on the form that says the housing officer or whoever might be assessing them, social skills, got a real problem, maybe for the housing officer, but away from authority, they do have certain skills that are incredible. I haven't actually ever met anybody in my life really who's really got almost, I don't use this word, but in a way a kind of, I was going to say superpower, no, it's just such a revolting word and wrong concept. They have found a way to survive in a mode via guile. So I don't use the word even intelligence. Thoughtfulness. If there's anybody thoughtful watching any of these videos, right, I'm going to make a half an hour just to try and explain, because I do know it's not my thing. I started to, all that matters in life actually, well, there are a few things, but if you're going to say anything into the world, which I didn't plan to, having done a bit, I've got to tidy it up a bit. Know the one mind who you feel in terms of their life experience, politics, social mores, values. That person is your audience, and I happened to start that a year ago. That's kind of irrelevant, except for there are so many rather messed up there are so many issues. I met a fantastic woman about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's a wonderful story. I haven't got time to tell it now, but I would never normally talk to a woman like this. I don't know. Now, and I'll tell you why I spoke with her. She was this most incredibly attractive woman, and I don't really talk to women like that. And it may have been actually just after the pandemic and when it started to loosen up, or either that or it was 2019. See? The reason I got speaking with this woman, I went to a cafe, and she had a six-year-old kid with her. I think he was 6 or 5, and they were sitting 2 tables down. And this little boy said to his mum, he said, like only a 6-year-old can. He said, "Mum, what are all these issues? Issues." And I just cracked up, and she saw my smile, and I just had to say something to her. I said, "God, he's got it so right." And we became really good friends. It's like ultra gorgeous goddess woman, about 40. And we met. We had bumped into each other a few times. I was just out shopping. But yeah, it's like this little boy. "Mum, what are these issues? Issues." It's like, and she got it straight away because she was having a lovely time with her kid in a cafe. And he's a wonderful parent, lucky, not privileged actually. Anyway, it's like issues have come along for the last decade that get in the way. And one of them, I don't do very much. I don't spend much time. Like one of the real issue is Dr. Susan Grenfell, 25 years ago, super wonderful woman, totally respected, Oxford professor, but not an elitist, not a snob, not a precious woman at all. She came out with research saying if you look into small electronic devices, you feel crap. You cannot not feel crap, or we could be scientific in you're sucked into this cave and you kind of hurt. Now, I look into these things very little, but now and again, once or twice a week, I might drop off trying to just learn a little bit as I'm dropping off with a podcast. And one of the ones I can't find anything that's like what I'd like to listen to. I'm not filling that void, but I know kind of what works. But I listen to and watch sometimes enough things that are totally contemporary. But one of them is, about the only one I really do listen to, Megan Daum, A Special Place in, Unspeakable podcast, and A Special Place in Hell she does with Sarah Hayden. And I've learned enough about. Now, obviously, far more so than 20 years ago, any ordinary British 16-year-old, even here, middle of nowhere, or sort of dinosaur land, they're accessing all the time people like Jordan Peterson, etc. I mean, unfortunately, America has taken over, so I try and figure what's a useful thing to say to a 25 or a 35-year-old. I have had quite a few off and on, sort of slightly under my wing in a really healthy way. What's a useful thing to say? Well, one of them is, like, unfortunately, you've got a man, Jordan Peterson, who's very, very influential. Many of you will have encountered him. And I'm sorry, first time I sort of started to look at his material, like, who is this? I keep hearing this name. About 4 years ago, I encountered a man who was blaming his inability to... a professional professor of psychology, psychiatry, or that world, over 50, he was blaming a product basically for the fact he'd got ill. We knew 40 years ago that if you even abuse 3 of your mum's Valium, you can be in trouble. Never mind painkillers. Now, it's like, how on earth has it got to this? Rather than him saying, God, I was such a fool and I must tell the world and set an example, like with so many people having, oh, fuck off. addiction problems, I was a fool and was taking barbiturates, painkiller, for a period of time. There hasn't been one of those over all morning, and it comes just when I'm trying to do this. Oh well. Like, what kind of an example? Don't blame the product. Don't give it some fancy name, your withdrawal from this product or your addiction to this product. It's like, only we had to learn. Don't fall down any rabbit hole. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, to me, just the most terrible example of all. So I've actually turned this on. Yeah, I'm going to waffle into my audio. Yes, Special Place in Hell. I was listening to them a couple of nights ago, and they're actually quite a good roundup. I mean, we can call them right-wing commentariat. Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro. I've monitored, I've listened in. It's the tone is the problem. The tone. It's so two sides. Now, we've known about that for a long time, of course. It's also silly, but the reason I mention this is that people like Megan Down and even Heather and Brett Weinstein, you'd call them kind of classical liberal, to some extent libertarian, into freedom, the balanced version of freedom, which is a utilitarian matter, and because you have to look at society as a whole, what's the most benefit for the most amount of people, and that's not some kind of brutalist philosophy or ideology. It's just obvious that that's kind of, if there is goodness in human affairs, that's what it is. Anyway, yeah, so I was listening to Megan Down and Sarah Haider, A Special Place in Hell, and a lot of it I don't like anymore, but they said they got quite a big following. They did a poll, what do their listeners wish them to talk about, and they were actually quite surprised themselves. Top of the pops was the culture wars. Now, in other words, this is an issue, and in my opinion, I know, basically irrelevant, and it is just putting salt in the gears. It's chucking sand in the gears of if anything, the last 6 months, although I very much doubt anybody has got the wisdom and thoughtfulness, just thoughtfulness, to say so. A 25, 35-year-old is really going to be, frig, what's happened to my world? Obviously, I referred to matters in the Middle East, and then Ukraine carries on, even though it's dropped out of the news headlines. So, material that I've made. Now, also, you hear from your Megans who, I'm of that setting. I would ideally just write a few thoughtful things, and I do think you take more in from listening on an audio. Now, it's not like I'm an old git and I'm of that generation. I know full well if I watch a video or I've got a video on with somebody talking, less of what they say sticks in than if I were listening to just listening to that same material in an audio format. And yes, your Megans, who rightly, Substack seems to be a pretty damn good kind of neutral, free speech, but not full of nutters, and it's where the thoughtful people are trying to set up their store with the stuff they have to share. Now, I started to put a load of stuff on Substack 6 months ago. This is much more interesting than I've waffled into here. But I appreciate people might not feel that the audio format is useful. All I know is that when I was 25, we had just actually on straightforward, if like somebody in America were listening to this, well, we only really had one FM station, which was played the latest popular music, rock, etc., etc. And I think it was most mornings at about 10:15 in the morning, came on something by a DJ who everybody liked. He was on television as well. Everybody respected him. They valued him. They knew they could trust him. And he did a thing about a 15-minute talk about a listener had written in about a relationship situation, and he would speak about it. He would tell a story, and he kind of he would put some opinion in, and they were magnificent. It's like one of the ways I brought myself up. It's like you learn so much just from a trusted person talking about a scenario between in a family or whatever. They were so useful. Audio. Anyway, yep. So people like Megan, etc., will say, "Oh well, if they put their material on YouTube, they get so many more listeners than if they put their material on Substack." There you go. Before I kind of try and tidy up stuff that I've put on YouTube, and it'll take it ages, and I need to turn Substacks into audios that can go onto YouTube, I'll be plodding along for a year. That's kind of what I plan. I'm going to stop on the 22nd of February. I've been putting my content on for 1 year, which I didn't plan in the slightest. And the main reason I put stuff on is I have one of the 5 million Damage mixed up. She was great when last time she lived with me, but Young Women of Britain, I just put a record of my life there for her. What was I going to say? Well, have I turned this on? Yeah, so I'm going to make an audio. Just going to try and keep it so quick. If I were speaking with one of my... Well, I've had for 10 years, I've gone around just gently speaking with people in various situations, and I always note down, quite often record what we're talking about, and everything that I have said, but I just want to simply summarize one thing. Everything I've said, I've had many conversations, and these are the things I know people are stuck on. So that's why I've spieled them, starting with the Substack and various other audios on ralphschism.com last about May, but June I really got going. Completely unplanned, just to keep myself occupied whilst I was waiting on something that couldn't happen. So be it. Thoughtful. Here's the real thing though. In many conversations, like with 30-year-old, hey, I'm really political, men particularly. It's pretty much the same with women. Political is the wrong word. It's like, hey, I really care about the beast. The beast. The beast is... I know one thing in life, probably more than anything, which is you have to read books, but much more importantly, of those books, and you don't have to gobble hundreds up. I spent probably for 20 years of my life, I would gobble at least 100 up a year. 3/4 needs to be goodish fiction. A really good example of a book that's lovely, everybody loves it, it's not hard to read, is A Man Called Ove. It's a story, but it's a beautiful, life-affirming story where I don't read many non-fiction books, apart from the fact that most of them will turn out to be wrong, and somebody will write one in 10 years' time which will largely overthrow what was in the hit book of today, which is gradually happening, for example, with Richard Dawkins' books, which were the hit books of the 80s. They don't do what you need. What you need, if you want to operate usefully in society, what fiction does. Simple fiction. Lovely book like Bel Canto, for example. It develops your imagination, and I'm not talking about like being aware of the fairies or the forces or the spiritual aspect. No, no, no. It develops your imagination amongst just being human, and not in a kind of, oh, well, it does help you. I can I can put my head in that person's head over there from a different culture or whatever. The most important thing is this: if your imagination is developed, well, you're faced with situations like the seas here, the rivers are all fucked, or other things in society, or why have we got the Middle East awash with arms, which is, if you've got arms, you'll end up with blood. Your imagination, and it mustn't be utopian just ain't gonna work. Whilst there's democracy generally around the world, or some version of democracy, imagination is, I believe in a picture where this situation is a bit better. That's all that imagination, I think that's the useful version of imagination. I got a picture in my mind of if certain changes were made, realistic ones, society may be better off, people may be better off in huge areas, or here, or this county, or whatever. And you believe in the picture that's in your head. So I'm afraid to say, yes. Well, it's not afraid to say, because it's a pleasurable thing to do. Once you get used to it, once you get into the habit, reading some reasonably good fiction is the thing above all that perhaps genuinely assists people to be thoughtful. Thoughtful's my word, and I've got lots of thoughtful stuff from 10 years, many years I planned to collect and make available, just if there's anybody thoughtful out there who might find it useful. And I know a fair bit of it is stuff, there's nothing worse than scandal or or putting things in a way that's shocking. No interest in that whatsoever. Maybe this day and age you have to weave in something that's a bit you can't, we just did say that. I don't know, I don't care. What I care about is certain thoughtful things that need to be shared. For I wish I'd had some of them clarified when I was 35. Simple as that. Simple as that. And hopefully I'll just drop dead before I actually get around to feeling so guilty that my stuff is such a mess, and just shaping it into something a little bit more. But you see, that's I'm not stupid. Unfortunately, I can also be extremely high-end art elitist. In a way, it is a kind of an art form. If you weave together everything, and I got other websites that are just all just chucking things down quickly, because I like to be out. That's my problem. My problem is I actually don't like to sit down. And if it rained solidly for 6 weeks, no problem. I'd get down to working through various things. Oh, I've left that bit out. I've got that should belong with that, blah, blah, blah. But the whole damn thing is a kind of multimedia kind of performance art, kind of, with little bits of poetry, which may not be obvious poetry, just poetical riffing upon what's it all come to. There we go.